This is a list of 50 things I wish I knew sooner about Rise of the Ronin, ranging from little beginner tricks to optimize the way you play, through to a crazy combat method for experts that takes out large groups of enemies in just 10 seconds or less. Character creation. Many modern games have deep character creation tools where people can make cool or goofy looking custom characters, and the Rise of the Ronin is one of those. Now typically, if you'd want to copy a look that someone else made, you'd have to go in the game and just do it all yourself manually, and it would take a while. But in this, if you go to the options tab during character creation, you can generate a unique code that can be shared with friends to copy your custom characters. Just go to the input code tab here in the options and load a copy. Now once your characters are created, the game asks what blade sharpening origin you'd like to choose, and you'll notice that the first 4 origins come with a free special skill, but you're only told the names of each skill, leaving you with only a vague kind of idea of what they might be. So let me quickly explain and then tell you which I think is the best for you to choose. Killer Origin says when you deflect a bullet or an arrow, it gets sent back and it deals extra damage. Breaker Origin allows you to assassinate enemies back to back. Seducer Origin has Speechcraft Liar, which lets you lie in dialogue with NPCs and leaves enemies panicked for longer. And Sapper Origin has Refill Medicine Pills, which brings your max healing up from 3 to 4 items. So which one's the best, right? Well, I would say being able to assassinate multiple enemies in succession is super useful. I would choose Breaker. Now let's talk about the start of the game. Once you first load in, you might decide that you want the smoothest experience while playing. To do that, I'd exit to the main menu and change your graphics mode in visual settings to prioritize FPS. The game is still gorgeous while you're doing that, but if you want the extra graphics, you can prioritize ray tracing or graphics instead. Now, right off the bat, they're going to have you try out a few different weapon types, and you might find that you really don't like your Origin's preferred weapon class, but don't worry about that, because you can change your blade sharpening origin before moving on if you so desire. The game also has online features, so naturally you'd think that if your internet disconnects, the game would disconnect, but that's not the case. As you can see, when my LAN cable lost signal for a few seconds here, it didn't actually kick me out of the game, which was really cool to see. For our next tip, when resting at a veiled edge, you replenish your usable inventory like healing items, but it comes at a cost because enemies in the area will respawn. However, if you kill an enemy leader and then you rest at a veiled edge, the nearby enemies won't respawn. You can differentiate between the leader and just follower enemy types by analyzing the symbols above their head. Leader looks like this, it's a larger symbol, while followers just have an individual single band in the middle. For our next tip, you might be a little light on healing supplies since you're playing your first real mission here. So before entering the Commodore's cabin during that first boat mission, enter the room to the right and assassinate this soldier, and you can loot this chest for some extra supplies. Enemies will also use their own martial skills, signified by a red glow while attacking, and these skills tend to allow the enemy to land critical strikes which deal massive damage and they'll stun. That means the best approach early on is to just dodge out of the way, but if you want to counterspark, make sure you're doing it as the red attack flashes. Moving on from the start of the game towards the early game, when you've completed the prologue, you'll arrive in Yokohama. Now if you turn around when that happens and you look behind you in the spawn, you'll be able to collect these resources. Now speaking of resources, the standard way for collecting requires you to press R1, and this isn't necessarily annoying, but wouldn't you rather just run over those materials to collect them? That's exactly what I've done, and it feels much better. And to do this, all you've got to do is go to Settings, Controls, Control Assist, and turn Auto Collect items from off to on. Now, even though we just turned Auto Collect on, you cannot Auto Collect from animals, so you instead have to run up to them and hit R1 to collect those materials. And this is done easiest with a horse, and you get it very early in the game, which is good. So in the Honmoku area, clear this public order, and then walk up to this horse and collect its flute. Equip it to your loadout in your equipment inventory, and you'll be all set. Now this is especially good news because running around the map manually can get tiring, right? And now you have a horse, so let's put the horse to work. Your horse is able to auto-route and run to destinations for you via dirt paths if you do the following. You just need to open the map, hover over the destination you want to go to, and hit L2, and that will set the auto-run destination. Another way to quickly get around is by teleporting to veiled edges. You can teleport to any captured veil edge, even when you're not resting at another veiled edge, so you can just teleport wherever, whenever, which is really handy. For managing your ki levels, also known as your stamina, you can get ki back by blade flashing, and what this means is as you attack, your blades are going to get covered in blood, and you can see how much blood is on your blade via this yellow bar on top of your weapon icon. But if you press R1 immediately after an attack, it'll wipe the blood clean and grant you ki, depending on how full the yellow bar was when it was used. Now, also going back to loadouts for a second here, you should put both your medicinal pills and healing elixirs in your quick selects. Medicinal pills are looted from enemies and elixirs are crafted, and make sure that you use your crafted ones first, as those are easier to replace. You can also head over to an apothecary trader to craft these elixirs. For our next tip, when you first discover an area, you'll notice there aren't many icons on the map for collectibles or activities. This is because you have a low bond level in that specific area. You can raise it by discovering veiled edges and completing activities in the area, and you'll slowly start to see more and more collectibles appear. Now, for a bonus tip, if you hit triangle while hovered over an area, you can see a full list of collectibles and your progress, which can be a handy kind of reference for you. Now, on the topic of the map, there's one type of mission that doesn't appear on the map no matter what you do. They just appear randomly in the world, and they're called chance encounters. You might end up finding strong enemies in those, or even have an encounter where you follow and pet a nice little doggo and you get a reward. And it's worth doing these as well, because completing them will increase your bond level with the area. For our next tip, item rarity has a range, and the higher rarity, the more special effects each item will have. These effects can range from extra damage to extra key generation to defensive effects and much more. There's a rarity tier called Exquisite that's almost guaranteed to have a set bonus special effect. To activate the set bonus, in most cases, you've got to wear at least 2 pieces with the set bonus to activate that part of the effect, and equipping more of the same set bonuses will unlock more effects. Now, for a bonus tip, you'll be able to buy bond jewels at black marketeers, which can be used at blacksmiths to transfer special effects from item to item, so that can be handy for when you're really trying to customize things. But you might be wondering, where do we find these exquisite tier items? In the Honmoku area, head over to this symbol on the map signifying a fugitive mission and take out this tough enemy. Then you'll find this chest here, and that has your first exquisite item inside. You also might be wondering how you can gain skill points, and it's pretty simple. You just collect karma from completing activities and then you turn it in. And you can see your karma progress in the top right when you gain or lose it. And yes, you can lose karma if you die to an enemy while carrying unspent karma. What will happen is after dying, a vendetta is started with the last enemy that you killed, and when you return to fight them a second time, they'll be carrying your karma. Then just damage them enough and you'll recover it, and now you have it back, you can convert your karma into skill points by interacting with a veiled edge. But wait! There's another way to get skill points as well, and these are shrines located all over the map, typically one in each area. Here's the location for the first one in Honmoku as an example. You just gotta continue following my path down here, and then go up to the shrine and interact for your free skill point. You'll also find a storehouse early in your game that requires a rusty key to open the door, and the game then tells you that you can find the key within the area. Now, you won't be able to find the key on the ground in some random place nearby, so don't just run around aimlessly here. Instead, usually these doors are near a public order, so head over to the nearest one and take out the leader, and you'll find a rusty key on their body that you can use at the storehouse for some high-tier loot. Now, sometimes you'll come across these buildings where enemies are sitting idle inside. The best approach is to enter through the window on the roofs, where you can drop down and surprise attack or assassinate enemies from above. But before you do this, check to see if there's a window on the other side, because typically you'll find some loot on the floor here that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Now, I absolutely love this grappling rope that they give you. At a base level, you can completely change the dynamics of fights by grappling to enemies or bringing them to you. There is one slight issue with that though, and that's that you won't be able to grapple to enemies if you haven't locked onto them already. So you'll just need to make sure that you lock on and then jump and press R2 to grapple to them, or to pull an enemy to you, you just press R2 without jumping. Now, I'm kind of a numbers guy, right? I'm a bit of a nerd, and I like seeing those numbers grow with my power. So you can turn those damage numbers on by going to System Settings, Game Settings, HUD, Damage to Enemies, off to on, and also damage to self off to on as well. Now, speaking of damage, you don't take too much fall damage when falling from a height, and you take even less when riding a horse, but beware, because you might be thrown off it when you land. And the unfortunate thing is you do take damage, but so long as you're out of combat, you will regen with this skill. For our next tip, I often forget controls and will button mash when playing a new game a little bit. And at first, I was fumbling my assassinations a little because I'd pressed the wrong button completely. But now, with this setting turned on in the settings, it shows triangle whenever I have an assassination opening. And to get it, you just gotta go to HUD settings and then turn critical hit assassinate button from off to on. Now, as we discussed earlier, hitting bond level 3 in an area will show all the collectibles in that area. And if you collect everything, you'll be rewarded with unique unique rewards for the area. And we are going to get more into our home base later, but our longhouse will also receive rewards when areas are completed. Now, on the selling items side of things, it doesn't really yield much coin, especially for early gear. So what I'd recommend you do is disassemble unwanted items for materials at the blacksmith rather than selling. And you can change that when we get past Yokohama Bridge, which we'll move on to in just a second here. But for early game, disassembling is the way. Now, you'll also quickly notice that it's a pain to select each item when selling or disassembling lots of items. You can either hold square and hold right to select items quickly, or another option is to hit the big touchpad button and then select all items. The game won't select items that are locked though, and any items become locked after you equip them, and they stay locked when unequipped. So to unlock them, you've got to go to options once again and unlock the item. Another quick tip here that eases this is to go into settings, game settings, basic settings, and turn auto disassemble on. Selecting superior as the rarity, it will auto disassemble, and this will decrease your inventory bloat significantly, and it will get you materials really fast. Now, sometimes you'll give money to beggars, and well, sometimes they'll give you rewards as well. So that's another option you can make use of. Other times though, they might start attacking you if they see you have a bunch of money to offer, so be careful out there. So now we'll move on to focusing on content beyond Yokohama Bridge. This is a heads up that if you only want content for the very beginning of the game, then now's your time to drop a like on the video, consider subscribing, and tap out for the next one. But for those of you that want some of the more expert level tips here, let's talk about Yokohama Bridge onwards. So we need to have a conversation about collectible cats. So you find your first one just here in the Honmoku area on top of the building, and it's very easy to capture this first little guy, but finding them becomes increasingly difficult as you progress. Cats like this one in the Pleasure District react to sound more so than others, so if you're running while approaching them, it's going to run away. And this cat here also gets scared easily and runs away when approached. Now, it's not the end of the world when this happens. All you need to do is run away from the area and come back like I have done in the gameplay, and the cat will reappear. But this time, approach a bit more carefully, and you'll then be able to pet the cat. Now, as you play further into the game, you'll realize that there are places you can't reach, including a cat on top of the building. There's no way to grapple up, and grappling to this floating thing does not launch you far enough to get to the cat. Don't waste a bunch of time trying to get to it, and instead just come back to this area later in the game and you'll have a way to acquire the cat then. Now, for a bonus tip, you can purchase rewards that unlock as you find more and more cats at this vendor in the Pleasure District. If you don't have access to them, don't worry, just keep playing and they will eventually appear. Now, similar to cats, you'll find more vendors across the world that have unlockable rewards tied to collectibles and activity completions, such as a trader based on fugitive kills. You've just got to complete the map 100% and you'll be able to purchase whatever you want from those traders. Now, your actions and dialogue choices will have an impact on your bonds with people in the world. If your objective is to just schmooze all the characters in the game so that they like you, just agree with what they have to say, and as you can see, agreeing will boost your bond with those characters. For our next tip, as you progress through the story, you'll unlock the Longhouse in Yokohama. This brings a bunch of benefits to your character and adds ways to bond with other characters you've become friendly with. When you come home, there's a chance that a friend will be hanging out waiting for you, and you can then talk to them and offer them gifts to strengthen your bond. And you can see which gifts are beneficial to characters you're speaking to simply by looking for this symbol on the gifts. The great thing about the Longhouse area is that you can now travel back to the starting area, Honmoku, and finally do this fugitive that's only visible at night. You can either rest at the Longhouse or change time with the watch that your friend gives you right after interacting in the Longhouse. And for a bonus tip, whenever you're walking around after unlocking the Longhouse, you'll run into these cute little traveling doggos, and you can pet them to gain silver coins, but that's not all that they do, right? You can also send your own dog out on collection missions from the Longhouse for a price, so you can be a little bit more productive while you're playing the game. Now, you'll notice that you may not have access to some dialogue options, like a liar or a persuasive option, because these are unlocked via a skill point upgrade to the charm stats category. But additionally, every 2 points you put into a category will enhance your total respective strength, or dexterity, or charm, or intellect. There are also chests in the game that are seemingly impossible to get to, just like that cat on the roof that I mentioned earlier, and that's because they require a glider. So don't consume all your time trying to figure out a way up there. Just wait until you unlock the glider, and then you can start doing it. To unlock the glider, just focus on missions involving the inventor guy, and eventually he'll give you a camera and a glider. At the inventor, you'll be able to upgrade your glider and other tech items too after you find foreign books from around the world, which are usually found in chests. Now, sometimes you'll need to complete an activity before being allowed to upgrade certain tech, including one glider upgrade. This requires you to complete glider training, which can be found here on the map, and on your first completion at each tier, you'll receive loot, which includes the book needed to upgrade the glider at the 6,000 point threshold. Another thing to mention is you can repeat these activities actually also and earn secondary rewards on all subsequent completions. And also, by the way, if you're not a fan of how the glider controls, you can change it to invert the flight in the settings just here. Now, glider training isn't the only type of training you'll come across, and the rewards for each training type work identically to glider training, so there's firearms training, horsebow training, and more to find around the world. The most fun one is the dojo, where you can face off against characters you've bonded with to practice your fighting skills. For our next tip, there are missions for taking pictures out in the world, and sometimes those can be a little tricky getting right. When you take a picture, make sure that the crosshair has turned red, and that'll mean that you'll complete the objective, and if not, you'll have to find the right spot and framing for the photo, aiming for wherever the crosshair needs to go to turn red. The best thing to do is to stand exactly where the camera icon is on the map and pivot until you find the right spot to take the photo, but additionally, you can also hit triangle while hovering over the camera on the map to get a description of the required photograph. For our next tip, I'm a dumbass and I always forget character names, right? And their relation to the story and just how everything fits together. But what they've done here is they allow you to open related entries while in cutscenes, so you can read up on the lore of characters and locations to get you back up to speed in case you're as forgetful as I am. You can also gamble, which is unlocked by hanging out with Shinsaku from the anti-Shogunite faction. You basically bet on whether or not to die add up to an even or odd number. Now, I have nothing but this anecdotal evidence to go on here, but I bet on even about 15 times, and I only won a couple of times, so be careful out there. The game might be rigged. Now, for a bonus tip, if you end up with a fat stack of tokens, you can trade them here for high-value items, which can be sold for a high price at other traders. Now, if you're anything like me, you want all the loot you can get. So let's talk about this big chest locked inside this rundown building. There's a red barrel inside, and as we know by now from playing lots of video games, red barrels like to explode. However, we can't simply just swing at it or grapple or hit it with an arrow to make it blow up. Instead, we need something flammable. And so this is where our inventor friend comes in, and if we progress his story, there's a fire pipe, aka a flamethrower, that he gifts to us, and you can then take that back to the barrel and show that chest who's boss to get your loot. Okay, so I've avoided talking about combat styles for some time now in the video because I don't feel like they have as much of an impact until you start discovering more styles as you play. So to get into this in a bit more detail, enemies will have either a red symbol, grey symbol, or blue symbol above their heads while in combat, and that relates to the combat style that you're currently using and how effective they are against those enemies. It's really important as you get better at the game to change your combat style while fighting multiple enemies to get the most out of all of your strikes, and to do this, you have to first forge bonds with other characters to learn their styles, or defeat fugitives and steal their styles. To change which style you're using, hold R1 and move the right stick, and you'll see which style is most effective depending on the enemy you're currently locked onto. Now, when holding R1, you'll see that you only have 2 attacks on square and triangle, but when fighting with an ally, they have up to 4 of their own martial style attacks, and you can level up certain combat styles by strengthening bonds with other characters, so make sure to target those who have styles that fit your playstyle. Another tip is, I often skip dialogue and then I immediately forget what I just skimmed through, but if you miss an important thing, you can see the conversation history by hitting square while actively inside the dialogue. For our next tip also, you can sneak attack with the glider. I love opening combat sequences with one of these moves, and it's actually really OP. Now, eventually, as you continue to play, you'll upgrade the glider to have a boost option, but something that's not immediately obvious at first is whether or not it glides further while boosting. So I've tested that for you, and it turns out that you actually travel roughly the same distance when not boosting versus boosting, and as far as I know, the only way to get additional distance is to close and then reopen your wings as you regenerate ki when you're not gliding. Now, at the start of the video, I mentioned a crazy combat technique, right? It involves the glider, and so we're going to perform the technique on this little group of enemies just here. They're going to be our test subjects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sneak attack from above, and with my rapid assassinations skill unlocked in the dexterity stat, I can repeatedly critical strike each enemy one after the other, and because the glider sneak attack is so OP, and the rapid assassinations mean that you can deal a bunch of damage for free, the fights that you use this technique on are barely going to last even a handful of seconds. I almost feel bad for the enemies. So out of sympathy for those enemies, it would be amazing if you could hit the like button to cheer them up, and I'll see you soon in the next video.